Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? So good morning to our Brazilian audience. Good afternoon to our British ones. My name is Saldanha-Ures, and I come to you as the president of Britcham, São Paulo. This challenging year is almost over, but we managed more than ever to reinforce Britcham's mission statement, to be the reference of the UK-Brazil business community, providing a forum to foster bilateral trade, investments, services, and relationships. As most of you know, we're present in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Paraná, Minas Gerais, through our branches acting nationally and harmonically. Our membership enables the networking with high decision-making executives in Brazil and in the UK. Regarding our committees and discussion groups, we have several fronts and opportunities as displayed on the opening slide of this webinar, both the subjects and the names of our leaders who had them. To learn more about each, please just visit the Chamber's website, britcham.com.br. I also wanted to show my immense gratitude to Britcham's supporting members whose brands were widely publicized in the opening slide of our webinar. To Vera Inês, our dear friend who chairs the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain, for the growing partnership that is being realized to make this event happen. To Bianca Antacli, our super committed president of Britcham's Environment and Sustainability Committee. To Guilherme Leal, vice president of Britcham's Environment and Sustainability Committee, who came to join our forces in us reaching out to these very important topics. To Alan Lufty, president of the Economy and Finance Committee, the co-organizer of this webinar, and all of whom have been spending an enormous amount of hours planning these events with calls, studies, interviews, etc. Thanks to the speakers and to the brilliant speakers, actually, Fábio, Zenaro, Kátia, Fenyves, and Alexei Bonamin for accepting our invitation to speak in this webinar. I pass on to Vera for the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So good morning, everyone in Brazil, and good afternoon to everyone in the UK and in Europe. It gives me a great pleasure to open this seminar today with our partner, Britcham, in Brazil, about this very important theme, which is green bonds. But before we go onto the business of the day and we hear from our speakers, I would like to welcome you in the name of the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain. As it is the case with Britcham, we exist to promote trade relations and businesses between Brazil and the UK. We have been doing that in London since 1942 for almost 80 years. And for that, we try to bring as much relevant information about business and business prospects between the two countries as we can. At the moment, we do this via information in our website, on LinkedIn, but especially via the webinars that we promote. And doing webinars has enabled us for the first time in our history to do events with Britcham and other entities such as the DIT of the UK government, and to give, I believe, more exposure to our members that participate of these seminars with us. I would therefore like to encourage you, if you have not done that yet, to join us and to join Britcham to benefit from all these opportunities that we are offering. So having said that, I am really delighted to be discussing today such an important theme. We all care about the environment, and green bonds are a very clever way to bring finance to environmental related projects. The transition to a low carbon economy, as undertaken by countries who signed the Paris Agreement, agreed at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP21 in 2015, demands substantial investments in various areas, such as renewable energy, carbon transport and technology, water and waste infrastructure, amongst others. The United Kingdom, from where I speak, Parliament has passed legislation in June 2019 requiring the government to reduce the UK's net emissions of greenhouse gases to zero by 2050, thus becoming the first major economy in the world to pass laws to end its contribution to global warming by 2050. Brazil has also undertaken to reduce its greenhouse emissions during the COP21. And this commitment will require large amounts of investment from public and private parties to finance the transition to a low carbon economy. It is exactly in this context that green bonds, which are fixed income instruments that are used to raise funds to finance environmental or climate-related projects, come into play. Example of eligible activities for green bonds are renewable energy generation, pollution prevention and control, and many others that we will hear from our speakers today. So what are we going to do today? How is this being done in Brazil? What is the status of the matter in Brazil, and how can the UK and Brazil work together to achieve our common goals? How is B3, the São Paulo Stock Exchange, responding to this challenge in its role as a market coordinator? And what doubts issuers and investors have in the process? We are going to hear from our speakers today exactly about that. And now to continue, I will pass on to Guilherme, who will introduce to you the brilliant speakers that came to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you very much. So, of course, we are delighted to have with us not only the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in the UK, represented by you, Vera, but also three prestigious experts in green bonds issues in Brazil, who will certainly contribute to our understanding on the latest discussions on this subject. So I have the pleasure to introduce Kátia Fenyves, who is the program manager of the Green Finance Prosperity Fund program led by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the British government. Fábio Zenaro, who is director at B3, one of the world's largest financial market infrastructure companies, and Alexei Bonamin, partner of the leading firm TozziniFreire Advogados, who is widely experienced in capital markets and banking and finance issues. Each panelist will have 10 minutes to make their talk, and then we will move to the Q&A section, which will also take about 10 minutes. So it will be limited to 2 or 3 questions. So I encourage our audience to send very straightforward questions in our Q&A. And I kindly ask our speakers to make an effort to keep their presentations within the 10-minute time frame. So without further ado, I'll pass to Kátia. And Kátia, could you please tell us a little bit about the Prosperity Fund and its role in fostering the market of green bonds? And perhaps you'd like to make a general review on the subject, putting everybody on the same page.
Thank you, Guilherme. Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to thank Britcham for the invitation and greet my panel colleagues as well. It's a pleasure to share this morning with you discussing this very trendy financial instrument, green bonds. Most of you have learned a lot of it this past few months. And it's good for us to use our curious eyes here in the session today and look at similarities of this financial innovation that came out in 2008 as a solution for a period that was also facing a systemic crisis. And in many sense, it's very similar to the situation that we are currently facing today. So I think it's worth exploring a little bit the history of this instrument to find inspiration for our current moment as well. So the year was 2007, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released its fourth assessment report, which was the first one that gained public visibility. And also because it was the first time that scientists gathered data with enough confiability rate to prove that climate change was due to human action. This period coincided with a series of extreme events as well, such as Hurricane Katrina in the US and intense heat waves in Europe, floods in China, and also the melting of Mount Kilimanjaro glaciers. And these were all events discussed in a book and documentary called The Inconvenient Truth, An Inconvenient Truth, that I know most of you have seen, as it was led by former US Vice President Al Gore in 2006. With the public visibility of these discussions, the IPCC itself and the report came to public visibility and became the subject of news and discussions worldwide. And this same year, 2007, the European Investment Bank launched its Climate Awareness Bond, which was an equity index-linked bond that was listed in 27 domestic markets in the European Union. The IPCC findings, plus the increased occurrence of natural disasters and the EIB experience with earmarking bond proceeds for climate investments, prompted a group of Swedish pension funds to think about how they could use their money to really prompt climate solutions as well, considering their long-term investment horizon as pension funds. And in 2008, the World Bank issued its first green bond in partnership with the Swedish bank SEB. The solution was very straightforward, actually. The investors wanted a safe place to put their money and to know that they were making a difference for climate change. At the same time, the World Bank had environmental projects to be financed. It had a track record as a high quality bond issued and the ability to report against impact measures. But there was this missing piece yet. How could the investors really know that the projects that they were supporting had climate additionality? So this was when CICERO, which is an international center for research on climate and environment based in Norway, Oslo, came into the game. Because CICERO experts, they did have the knowledge to assess whether projects were going to make a positive impact on climate and the environment. And what followed were many conversations among these stakeholders, the pension funds, SAB, CICERO, and the World Bank Treasury, and not without challenges, because as you know, the language that are used in these different institutions are quite different. So they needed to really make an effort to bridge the gap between finance, development, and sciences. But still in 2008, November 2008, success came, and the World Bank finally issued the first World Green Bond. And the bond created really changed the market for good and served as a blueprint for what we have currently in all our jurisdictions. So it defined criteria for project eligibility for green finance. It also introduced the concept of a second opinion provider, which is very important to promote transparency. And it added impact reporting as an integral part of the whole process. And also, as a consequence, it piloted a new model for collaboration between investors, banks, development agencies, and also scientists. The World Bank raised awareness for climate change and also demonstrated the potential for investors to support climate solutions through safe investments without giving up financial returns. And it formed the basis for the Green Bond Principles by the International Capital Markets Association, and highlighting the social value that bonds could create and the need for a sharper focus, as I said, on transparency. Investors interested in the social and environmental purpose of their investments reflects this fundamental shift in the bond market in general. They understand their power to support initiatives their stakeholders care about, and they do not have to give up financial returns. They also want data that show how they are addressing environmental, social, and governance aspects, and they are increasingly understand that in addition to creating social value, this perspective also adds them to mitigate risk in their own portfolio. An issuer with good sustainability practice will generally be a better investment itself. In the case of Brazil, the green bond market presents a very promising opportunity, especially in the context of the pandemic. Faced with the challenge scenario for public health and the economy, the Ministry of Economy has focused firstly to ensure the necessary resources for public health, and secondly, to adopt economic policy aimed at protecting the economically vulnerable population and mitigating the impact of the crisis on companies and workers. But at the same time, the focus on this short-term emergency does not mean leaving aside the challenge of resuming and accelerating economic growth in the medium and in the long term. And for this, investment will be necessary, especially in infrastructure. Brazil currently invests in average less than 2% of its gross domestic product in infrastructure. And we would need to more than double that amount if it were to have a stock of infrastructure capable of sustaining economic growth and also to meet the expectations of the population. The resource for this will definitely not come predominantly by the state, which is currently facing this very challenging fiscal situation with recurring primary deficits and a public debt that now, with the emergency expense, came up to rise 90% of the gross domestic product. And in fact, when the emergency is over as well, the state will have to resume the fiscal consolidation agenda. So this is the moment that there is a more need for developing private financing mechanisms for investment in infrastructure, and green finance can present itself as a financial innovation with the potential to play a relevant role in this sense, not only improving the quality of life of citizens, but also preserving the environment, which is also something that has been raised by the media and the preoccupation of investors abroad. But there is still some gaps for the development and consolidation of the green market in Brazil, especially if I could mention a couple: the uncertainty about assets and projects that qualify for green financing, as well as the scarcity of financial instruments, the complexity and costs of operations, trained and specialized teams that can assess ESG aspects of the operations, financial education, and also the consolidation and standardization of legal instruments and jurisprudence in lawsuits. But building on its experience with the Green Investment Bank, which supported the country to come out of 2008 crisis, and of course the overall expertise that with large capital markets, the UK, through its Prosperity Fund Green Finance Program, is exactly hoping to support Brazil to overcome these challenging gaps and consolidate definitely the green and sustainable finance agendas in the country. Very briefly, it's doing so mainly through three interventions. So the first one is the development and implementation of ESG methodologies to be integrated in development banks' mandates, governance, policy, and practice. The second intervention is the structuring of green financial instruments, such as green bonds, but also other ones, such as sustainability-linked loans that I'm sure other colleagues in this panel will explore further, and also de-risk mechanisms to really incentivize the application of resources in pilot projects, mainly in renewable energy and sanitation. And the expectation here is that these pilot projects can really open the way, pave the way for other investments to come in a large amount to Brazil's sustainable infrastructure. And finally, the third intervention is about the development and structuring of a pipeline of green projects to be matched with investors' interest. So linking a little bit more closer capital to project. As Vera has just mentioned to us in her opening, the UK holds the presidency of next conference of the Paris of the UNFCCC COP26, and it's leading by example, being the first developed nation to legislate for net zero by 2050, but also setting up ambitious revised NDC, national determined contributions, aiming to reduce by 68% its greenhouse gas emissions in comparison to 1990 levels. And finally, putting forward the real economy side of the debate, which is the green industrial strategy, wanted to demonstrate that dealing with the climate crisis is not only about negotiation, but also real world action. And especially in this context and the roadmap towards COP26, the UK is even more committed to tackle climate change and willing to support other nations to raise their ambitions and make the same movement, taking the opportunity presented by the economic recovery phase itself to build back greener. And Brazil can take the advantage of being already a very special and close partner to the UK in economic terms. And this we can show through the economic and financial dialogue that both countries hold. And there will be the third edition of this event. The ministries of economies of each country will be speaking to each other next Thursday and agreeing on priorities of collaboration for the next couple of years. And this close partnership can really support Brazil to engage definitively in this aligned transition trajectory. So I really welcome partners here, the private sector representatives that are hearing us, to come and embrace this agenda as well, hear more about the Prosperity Fund program, and contact us for any sort of information that can support you as well as real economy stakeholders to make the same move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kátia. So now I move to, based on this general overview that Kátia presented to us, I'd like to ask Fábio if you could share some of your thoughts on the development of the market of green bonds in Brazil, explaining the role of B3 in this process.
Of course. Thank you very much, Guilherme, for the introduction and the opportunity. And first of all, hello everybody, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'd like to thank the British Chamber for this invitation. It's an honor to take part in this discussion with my colleagues on such important matter and have the opportunity to share our view about the ESG environment in Brazil. Before I talk a little bit about how we see our role in this market, I think it's important to give a view of global movements and specifically conditions in Brazil. And of course, because of the pandemic, the world has changed at all, and as a consequence, the world of investment has changed too. So in this short period of time, the ESG topic has gained prominence in the news, on major forums, and in the investment strategy decision-making of companies, managers, investors, and clients. So the global market has proven to be in tune with ESG-related changes. And maybe as an example that we can give is the letter that Larry Fink, a CEO of the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, sent to business leaders, placing sustainability at the center of investments. And we can feel it. This is the movement starting in Brazil. And I think another issue specifically from Brazil that is important that we say is that we are having opportunity to develop the capital market at all. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we wouldn't have this conversation just because we had macroeconomic conditions that didn't give us the opportunity to develop the capital market. So specifically, I'm specifically talking about the interest rates. So today we have the lowest interest rates we ever had in Brazil. And this is a very, very important for capital markets. So this is important for the ESG bonds too. So this condition we have now. We spent a lot of time in the past discussing what should we do to develop the capital markets. And although we still having some barriers, we have some challenges that we have to face. This is maybe the biggest barrier we have beaten with lower interest rates that we have now. But talking about our how we see our role in this environment, B3 we consider us as a market infrastructure. So we see B3 is also being responsible for bringing the subject to the light. We see our role as a stock exchange to foster a sustainability best practice among its stakeholders and ESG products and services that support our clients during this evolution. And to strengthen this commitment, we have approved it in NSG ESG plan based on 3 main goals. The first goal that we have is connected to the progress in aligning B3's management and strategy as a company with sustainability best practices. So we should be a reference, and that's what we want to be. The second one regards to the enhancement of ESG best practice in the Brazilian market. In partnership with several players, we promote opportunities to support our clients in advancing their practice and highlighting those practices that are already consolidated, promoting wide experience sharing in the market. And finally, the third goal is about strengthening our current ESG products and services and development of new business opportunities. So in this matter, I think that's the main focus of this discussion here. In this matter, we are promoting the restructuring of our main sustainability indexes, such as the corporate sustainability indexes, the ISE B3, and the carbon efficient indexes, the ICO2 B3, to make them even more attractive for the investor. And we are also working on granting greater visibility for green bonds issuances in Brazil. Furthermore, we want to develop new business fronts, promoting these discussions and the carbon market too. Regarding the green bonds agenda at B3, we know that a low carbon economy that faces up to climate change means robust transformations and poses the need to implement changes in the market. So, as Kátia has already said, we have an incredible environmental potential and standing out as a destination of interest for green financial investments due to its production mix. Several financial instruments have been created to enable the challenge of capital to finance sustainable economic activities, including the green, social, or sustainability bonds. So being the center of this transformation is a responsibility, but also a great opportunity for B3. Since the end of 2018, the GSB bonds at B3s, they are registered at B3s and can be identified on Trader. Trader is our platform for trading public and private bonds, and public and private bonds. So this was the first step we did in order to make it more clear, more easy to see the GSB, the GS bonds that we have here. So the thematic bonds registered at B3 today it's around 5 billion reais, so which represents 22 issuances from 16 different companies. So it's just the beginning. I think we are in the beginning. As I said, we some years ago we didn't have conditions for capital markets to develop in Brazil. So it's of course it's not a big number, but I like to see as something that is growing in Brazil. So 22 issuances, 16 companies. I think it's a good number for the beginning. Recently, we had the first issuance of a social bond through a letra financeira bond. This is a very particular bond that is issued by banks in Brazil. And it was a bond to support loans to small and medium-sized enterprises and healthcare companies during the COVID-19 pandemic. Its notional amount was around $100 million, or around 500 million reais. Within the context of B3's strategy, we are promoting debates. I think this is very important to do, so to discuss, to put in the media, to promote debates and initiatives to demystify and foster the green, social, and sustainability bonds issuance locally. And we do this in partnership with market organizations specialized on the theme. So B3 also supports the Green Bond Transparency Platform on the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, in Latin America and the Caribbean region to give the greater visibility to green bonds registered in Brazil and attract more investors. We need to give it transparency. We believe that we need to give transparency on the post-issuance phase. Investors want to know the use of procedures of the issuance, especially when it's related to social and environmental impacts. At the moment, we are also studying to standardize the information requested through our issuers department with this Green Bond Transparency Platform to disclosure more consistent data for the market. We are currently mapping the profile of investor. I think this is an important issue to be addressed, and investors interested in green bonds, so we can connect the issuances registered at B3s with these investors. So maybe information is very essential here. That's what we believe. So let me now share some numbers with you. On this 22 issues I mentioned before, registered at B3, 95% of the investors are individuals, 3% non-financial companies, and 2% investment funds or institutional investors. Of course, if you consider the volume, the distribution is very different. Considering the volume traded by the investors, the distribution would be like 31% in investment funds and institutional investors, 29% in treasury, in banks, 22% brokers, and 13% individuals. So as we can see, we have space in different kinds of investors here. And also I would like to emphasize some market information. So until the end of September, the volume of Brazilian green bonds issues hit a total of 15.5 billion reais. Of course, I'm considering the domestic and the foreign markets here. And this is an increase of 55% in relation to the 9.7 billion reais volume in 2019. So another remark I would like to say here, Suzano raised 750 million in sustainability linked bonds, and this opened up a new business environment for Brazilian companies, in our opinion. And banks also started issuing green bonds. So in the beginning of the year, we had Banco Votorantim raised $50 million for renewable energy loans. And also in September, as I mentioned, Banco ABC Brazil raised 500 million reais, or $100 million in a social bond that I have already mentioned. So as a conclusion, I would say that we are creating the conditions in Brazil to have a strong ESG bond market. And I believe in the near future, due to the lower interest rates, which promotes the capital markets in a general way, and of course ESG bond markets, and due to the change of mind in society, especially in the investors. So as I told you, we are feeling this. Investment funds and even individuals searching for specific bonds or investments linked to this matter. This is going to bring new demands for investors and new awareness from companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fábio. Thank you very much. It is very good. We are very happy to see the engagement of B3 in this such an important topic for not only globally, but especially for Brazil as well. And based on your talk and Kátia's, I'd like to ask Alexei, as a lawyer, what risks and opportunities for companies do you see in the market of green bonds in Brazil?
Thank you, Guilherme. Very good to hear all the remarks from the prior speakers here. Very interesting points raised by Fábio, Kátia, and others here. And you know, the first conclusion that we can have now is that the world is changing, hopefully for the better, you know. And this new landscape that some of our speakers mentioned, in particular as a response from the effects of the economic downturn caused by the pandemic, is one of the features that shows that the world is changing. And such green recovery packets mentioned here, not only the UK but in other countries, the Green New Deal that Europe is implementing now, even international movements like the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum, and even the UK when the Britcham Academy published a very well-known report on purposeful business. All of this to show that more and more we have discussions, as some commentators say, that we are moving to or shifting to what they call a stakeholder capitalism. When you have all the stakeholders to be considered, and not only the shareholders, but all the community and all the stakeholders, the planet being considered on the decisions, this is a completely shift of what we have been doing in the past and what we're going to do for the future. So, and for this transition, because it's important to note that we are not already there, not transition to this new normal. And for sure, we are going to need funds. Without funds, we cannot have this transition. And we are talking about trillions and trillions of US dollar, British pounds. And only this Green New Deal in Europe, they would allocate more than 700 billion euros on this transition. So all this movement, all this transition is to take our investments, our society looking for low carbon economy and a circular economy. And as a result of this, as I was saying before, we need to finance this. And green bonds will be of a paramount importance for that. Not only green bonds, not only private credit or money for investors, but we are going to need philanthropy, we're going to need money from development banks, multilateral banks. All of those different type of funds would be important because no single one will be sufficient. So we need all of this. And green bonds, it's important because they can attract private capital for this transition, and using modern concepts like blended finance, blending different types of capitals for finance this transition. So having said that, what is important here, because we are discussing a lot green bonds, but green bonds is not rocket science. Green bonds are no different from a conventional bond. Their only unique character is that the proceeds be invested in projects that they generate environmental benefits. So this is an important concept because every time that we discuss green bonds with clients, they tend to think that it's so complex to structure a green bond, it's so difficult, but it's not the case. It's very similar to our conventional bonds. And we're talking about fundraising using a fixed income instrument. So like other fixed income instruments, green bond is another one. But what is important, and when you think about how the company would benefit, how the company would use a green bonds. So there are different types of them. The most common one, as you're discussing now, is the use of proceeds bonds. So you use the proceeds fundraised by the bond aligned with green bonds principles, for instance, as Kátia mentioned before. But there are other types of bonds. We can have, like, for instance, green revenue bonds, where the credit exposure from the investors in the bond is to be paid cash flows of the revenue streams. So unlike the proceeds, we are now talking about the revenues. But there are other types, such as the green project bond, like any kind of project finance. Project finance is not new. What is new is to have a project finance linked to a green bond, green project. And last but not least, we have the green securitized bond, where you have all the receivables, the portfolio of receivables of a project, for instance, being under a securitization that you can, monetize those flow of credits. This is just to say that we don't have one single type of bond. We can have different types for different purposes because companies, they have different needs, so they may benefit from these different types as well. Another feature, what is very important for green bonds when companies are thinking to structure a product like this one, is to select the product. The first thing, you have to select a green project, either aligning with the green bond principles or any other international accepted standard. Resource management, because is the second important concept, because you not only select the project, but also how you manage the resource for those projects. Third, reporting, transparency. Without this, no one would allocate capital because those investors are more and more interested in purpose, intentionality, how they understand their money, their funds can change the world for the better. So reporting and transparency would be of paramount importance as well. And lastly, as Kátia mentioned, we have the external review, because all those items that I mentioned before, selection of products, resource management, and reporting. This is also the case of a conventional bond, but external review that we are going to measure the impact, how you reduce emissions, how other criteria would be used to measure the impact for the better in the environment. So this external review component is what differentiates a conventional bond from a green bond. So opinions, verification, certification, and even green rating. These are the most typical way how to measure those externalities. In terms of when you think about okay, I'm going to use the green bond, but what are the most common use types of projects supported by those green bonds? By and large, at least in Brazil, you see renewable energy. But more and more, we are going to see energy efficiency, pollution prevention and control, sustainable water and wastewater management. So those are very common uses of green bonds. And as I said before, this is not different than a conventional bond, because both the green bond and conventional bonds are that instrument. Both of them pay periodic coupons. Both of them can receive, for instance, a credit rating. The financing and refinance is the rationale behind of those instruments. But when it starts the differentiation between green bonds and conventional bonds. So when the proceeds are applied to green bonds, because in the case of green bonds is mandatory, and in the case of a conventional bond is a possibility, but it's not mandatory. Label. When you label a product as a green bond, they should be certified to have a second opinion and so on. It's not the case of a conventional bond. And the level of transparency for those allocation of funds and use of proceeds. All of these are also mandatory in a green bonds, unlike a conventional bonds. And lastly, we have the most important feature that I mentioned is the third-party review, the second opinion, and so on. So the second opinion is what really differentiates green bond from a conventional bond. This concept, it's very simple, but it's complex for someone, for those who does not understand the product to understand that this is not rocket science. It's to hire a third provider, a third service provider to deliver an opinion, and just it. In terms of structure of the product, there is nothing else to differentiate from conventional bond. And what is also important is that Brazil is doing very well, although it's not like in the UK, like Kátia mentioned, that the first one was 2007. The first issue in Brazil was 2015. So 5 years ago. We have important issues already issued in Brazil, around 40 different issues. But in terms of the size of our economy and our GDP, this is we have only few issues. We can do better in this regard. So what we have been seeing as the main sectors used by green bonds here in Brazil are renewable energy, of course, like other countries, this is very common, and infrastructure. Not because infrastructure, all the infrastructure, there is a correlation between green bonds and infrastructure, but in Brazil, we have tax incentives for infrastructure debentures, infrastructure bonds, And with this tax incentives, you can, of course, link those projects to green projects. So there is a tax incentive for those projects. But we also see some bonds related to forest and pulp industry. So those are the main sectors that we are going to see here in Brazil. New sectors that more recently they are using green bonds. The first one I'd like to highlight is agribusiness. Agribusiness is 1/3 of GDP here in Brazil, the Brazilian GDP. The agribusiness is the sector that represent our trade surplus. And of course, if there is room to link green bonds to agribusiness, this is makes a lot of sense for Brazil. And not only agribusiness for emission reductions, but also for forest preservation. The second sector that we are going to see more and more using green bonds in Brazil is sanitation. Because, you know, sanitation, we have a new regulatory regime in Brazil. Brazil needs a lot of investment in those sectors and makes a lot of sense for green products. And by the way, sanitation has two aspects that are important, not only green, but also social. Because when you you prepare all the infrastructure for sanitation up to your community, you not only have a positive environmental impact, but you're changing for the better the lives of people there. So this social aspect is also important for sanitation. And lastly,
Alexei,
yes.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we are approaching the end of the.
I'm finishing here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. And lastly, we have the new presidential decree in Brazil, which brought the concept of green bonds that are eligible for tax incentives in Brazil. So this is good news, because before we had, you know, those green bonds without any incentive, and now we can have new green bonds with those incentives. But Guilherme, this is my remarks. I'm more than open for the questions.
Thank you so much, Alexei. And again, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I would be happy to listen to you more and more, but unfortunately, we have limited time, and I will quickly link to the Q&A section. We have some questions. I'll try to forward one per panelist. Maybe we'll have to exceed a little bit of our time, but I think we can manage that. But so first to Fábio, you mentioned in your talk the carbon markets. Could you share your view on the development of this market in Brazil and its main challenges?
Okay, Guilherme. Yes, I think this is something that very important. We also know that the Brazilian government is discussing eventually a model for the carbon market in Brazil. It's something that it's in the news. And I think that maybe this is necessary, because maybe just the voluntary commitment is not going to be enough to have very good marks in this regarding this issue. So maybe we could have in the coming months some regulation about the carbon market in Brazil. From what I know, we have different models around the world, and even around the world, in some countries are being discussed new models. So I think that we are in this point, and this is going to be, I think that can be very important, and we can foster this agenda in Brazil. Maybe I can just mention, we have, it's not exactly a carbon market, but we had a first product in Brazil that is known as decarbonization credits, CBIOs in Brazil. It's something that was introduced in a national biofuel policy that we call here Renova Bio, is not the name of the program. And basically is the issuance of these bonds, these CBIOs, are the biofuel producers. The fossil distributor, the fossil fuel distributors have to acquire this. There is a regulation; they have to acquire some of these bonds. It's very specific. It's related to these two, let's say, two players. But it's maybe something that we can mention that we already have in the Brazil. And it's basically that this was created to allow Brazil to meet commitments taken on the Paris Agreement, and the idea is to increase the biofuels in the country's energy mix. So it's just it's different from carbon market, but it's an experience to be considered. But maybe I think that just the voluntary commitment may be not enough to achieve targets, and I believe that we should have some regulation about the carbon market in Brazil. And of course, B3 as infrastructure wants to help, not to foster, but to offer their solutions to this market in the future.
Thank you, Fábio. It is interesting that you mentioned the voluntary commitments. It's a perfect link to question to Kátia. Kátia, Carlos Peixoto, the head of the Oil and Gas Committee at Britcham, has a question of what to expect from COP26. His question is this: COP26 is quickly approaching. The UK government is pushing for a more practical resolution from the part of the participating delegations. In your view, what should we expect in terms of a more enforceable regulatory initiatives other than the usual voluntary commitments? This question was forwarded to all the panelists. So Carlos, I'm sorry, but due to the time constraint, I'm directing it to Kátia.
Carlos, thank you very much for the question. As you are aware, and I pointed out very briefly this in my speech, the UK is kind of shifting the ambition that came before with Paris Agreement in terms of negotiation. That was a very good landmark, and we achieved that in 2015. But now the question is about how we translate this ambition into real world action. How do we implement Paris Agreement and all the commitments that were made globally? So the difference that we have for this COP26 and the world map towards that is really integrating other stakeholders to the table. And that's why the private sector and the financial sector plays a different role here. So beyond the negotiations track, the UK government has led a series of campaigns that want to attract these other stakeholders to the table. And one of it is exactly the private finance campaign, which aims at integrating ESG and climate aspects in all financial decisions from now on, and how we are going to achieve that. So mainly the reference, the benchmark is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD. I'm sure many of you have heard this acronym as well, together with ESG. It's very trendy. And what they want to do, what the UK is willing to do with the CFD, is really to put forward mandatory reporting disclosures against climate considerations, of course, but also in the context of Brazil, we could explore many others that have a relation to social aspects and biodiversity, and that are very intertwined with our context. But besides TCFD, also promoting climate stress testing all across the financial system. Of course, central banks have an important role to play here. And as I said before, also to pave the way and to show how to structure and use this kind of scenarios, integrating climate variables for future financial decisions. But also companies could start integrating these variables in their business plan. And this is what the UK is doing. It's pushing forward this kind of resolution. And finally, to speak a little bit more on what Fábio has just discussed, I think one aspect, and that's very intrinsic to negotiations themselves, is the regulatory aspects of international carbon markets. So the discussions are pretty much anchored on Article 6, and how it envisions to regulate these transactions across the globe. But for sure, there is a challenge so far, and Brazil, in terms of how it has positioned itself previously, and it has many considerations in terms of carbon credits that can be accountable for monitoring and verification systems of the emissions that will count or not for this kind of compensation and transaction. So there is a lot to come, but the effort is really to bring more stakeholders and collective intelligence to the table, and to think collectively about these solutions. And as we have been seeing, there are many innovations coming out in the market, and there is a possibility that this ambition is finally channeling down and changing territory. So let's open the discussion more, but I feel that I could address a little bit the aspects of your questions, but of course I haven't touched everything that was possible.
Thank you, Kátia. And the last question is to Alexei from Nikita Pais. Alexei, the question is this: while there is a requirement to disclose the usage of the proceeds of the bonds at the time of the issuing them, is there a possibility to change the purpose of the bonds subsequently in case of a failure of the environment project? Also, what are the consequences of not using the proceeds towards the same purpose that was stated at the time of the issuance of the green bonds?
Thank you, Guilherme, for the question. Well, in Brazil, what happens? If you have a use of proceeds in the bond saying that you're going to allocate in green project, you have to do so. We cannot change the use of proceeds without a general meeting of the bondholders resolving on changing of the use of proceeds. Basically, the answer is it depends on the resolution from the bondholders to change. But assuming that the project is there, but there is no green externality, there is no such features that would characterize, and sometimes is even out of control of the issuer, those consequences. Well, in this case, what's common in Brazil is that would not characterize an event of default, will not accelerate the debt. Unlike other countries that I know that this case would trigger the acceleration of the debt or will be characterized as even the default. Brazil, no, is not a regulatory requirement for that, but it's a market practice. The result of this is that the bond would be a conventional bond. They cannot disclose the bond and promote the bond as a green bond. They have to exclude any reference to green projects and green whatever, but will not have a financial impact, a penalty for that, at least in Brazil for the time.
Thank you, Alexei. So I think we are done with the questions, and thank you very much for your participation, Kátia, Fábio, and Alexei. I learned a lot with your talks, and now I'll link to Vera, so she can make the final remarks after forwarding to your final thoughts.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Like you, I also learned a lot, and it was very, very interesting. And it is clear after hearing our speakers today that there is a huge potential for the issuance of a green bond in Brazil in very different sectors like renewable energy, infrastructure, agriculture, and many others as were mentioned today. I would like to link first to what Alexei said, that this is, of course, a complete shift from what we have seen in the past. But I think that an important message is that it is not rocket science, to quote again Alexei in what he said. It's not rocket science in terms of the difference between green bonds and traditional bonds. Of course, there is a very important difference in relation to reviews, to second opinions, and I think that this was very instructive to us to learn, and for investors and the players alike, to think of these requirements that apply. If we think about this market, it is something that started, and I'm grateful to Kátia to giving us an historic overview of how this started back in 2008. With the first issue by the Swedish investors that contacted the World Bank. This put us into perspective, and we see that whilst a lot has been developed, there is still, because of the commitments of all the countries in the Paris Agreement, there is still a lot to be done. And in this respect, it was very interesting, of course, to hear from B3. They have, of course, a super important role to play as a market coordination for companies that want to issue green bonds in Brazil, and that are, of course, very welcome to do so, as this is, as we all know, super important in present days. So with that, I would like to finish, to bring to an end my comments. Thanks everybody again. Thank you, Guilherme, for coordinating this and for being the moderator. And hoping to see you all again in events of Britcham and the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain. We have this new partnership, which I hope will take us further and further. Thank you. Over to you, Guilherme.
Thank you, Vera. So Kátia, Fábio, and Alexei, thank you very much. If you'd like to give some final words, just to end this event, I would appreciate. Kátia?
I just want to encourage everyone that is listening to us this morning to really embrace this agenda and look for us for partnerships, of course, but also to integrate these considerations in your daily activities. I think it's going to make a difference for the world we are living, for future generations, but also for our own well-being. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Fábio?
I just want to thank you for the invitation again. It was a pleasure to spend the time with you guys, share our views, and to hear from other people. So I thank you, my colleagues too, for sharing this time. And we also, I want to emphasize that we strongly believe in the development of capital markets in Brazil, and specifically of the ESG bonds. We believe that is something very important for the market, for the country, for the investors. So it's gonna happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Fábio. Alexei, please.
Thank you for the invitation. It was very nice at this panel indeed. And I think my last message is that, as I said before, the world is changing, but the world is changing with purpose, intentionality, and the world is changing for capitalism for all the stakeholders. And all those topics that we cover today, they are important for this change. And there is no space for greenwashing. There is no space for actions without purpose to be genuine. And investors are aware, the new generations, the millennium, they are, very, very pay attention to those matters. So it should be genuine.
Thank you. So we are done. I would like to thank you again, our speakers. I'd like to thank Carolina, Vera, Ana Paula, Bianca, and Alain, who also contributed to put this event in practice. And I hope to see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.